A mother's worst nightmare becomes reality when her beloved son, Kwang, goes missing without a trace. Weeks of desperate searching and unanswered calls push her to the brink, until a shocking phone call from the police shatters her world. A male body has been discovered in a nearby forest, and she must come to identify it. Accompanied by Kwang's grandmother and watched by Linda, who prays desperately for a miracle, they face the unbearable possibility that Kwang may be gone. Will hope survive, or has fate closed the door forever? Subscribe now to follow the heart-wrenching journey and uncover the truth. The days after Kwang's disappearance felt like a living nightmare for his mother. Every morning, she woke with the gnawing fear that today might be the day she would learn the worst, only to go through the day in a blur of unease and relentless worry. The house, once full of warmth and laughter, now echoed with silence, punctuated only by the occasional creak of floorboards or the wind rattling the windows. She could not shake the feeling that somewhere out there, her son was in danger, and yet, no matter how hard she tried to grasp any clue, he remained unreachable, as if swallowed by the very earth beneath their feet. The sleepless nights were the hardest. She would sit by the window for hours, staring into the darkness, imagining Kwang walking down the street, or hiding somewhere, lost and scared, calling out for her. Her mind raced with countless scenarios, each more dreadful than the last. She replayed every memory in her head, wondering if she had missed something, a text message, a call, a fleeting look, that could have warned her of the danger he faced. The questions gnawed at her relentlessly. Where are you, my son? Who could have taken you? Why didn't anyone see anything? Each unanswered question felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. Finally, in a moment of desperation, she went to the police station to file a missing person report. Her voice trembled as she gave the officers every detail she could remember: the day he went missing, what he had been wearing, the people he had last interacted with. She clutched her son's favorite sweater to her chest, as if the scent or fabric could somehow anchor her to him, keeping the hope alive that he would walk through the door at any moment. The officers nodded sympathetically, promising to do everything they could, but she could sense the weight of bureaucracy, the slow pace of investigations, and the limitations of their search. Still, she clung to the thread of hope, desperate for any sign, any lead that could bring him back. The weeks that followed were a cruel torment. The police conducted searches, spoke with neighbors, and canvassed the area, but each day ended with the same haunting emptiness. No trace of Kwang emerged. No witness, no clue, not even a whisper of his whereabouts. The phone rarely rang, and when it did, her heart would leap, only to sink again when the call was from someone bearing no news, no answers, only reassurances that they were still looking. Friends and relatives offered comfort, but even their words could not penetrate the fog of anxiety that enveloped her. Every sound, every shadow, became a potential signal of her son's presence, or worse, of his absence. With each passing day, the helplessness grew heavier. She found herself wandering the streets he loved, visiting places he frequented, hoping against hope that she might glimpse him in the crowd. She pinned missing person posters wherever she could, praying that someone, somewhere, would see him and call. Every night, she lay awake, imagining the worst while clinging desperately to the possibility of the best. Hope and fear coexisted in a cruel dance, each moment a pendulum swing between relief and despair. In her heart, she refused to believe he was gone, yet the empty spaces in her life screamed otherwise, and through it all, the one unshakable truth remained: she had to keep searching, keep believing, keep hoping. For Kwang. For the boy who was her son, whose laughter still echoed in her memory, whose absence left a void no words could fill. She whispered his name into the night, her voice breaking with emotion. Kwang. Come home. Please come home. Weeks stretched into a month, and still, Kwang remained missing. The days blended into a haze of unanswered calls and restless nights. His mother tried to keep herself busy, tidying the house, preparing meals he might have liked, and replaying every possible memory that could guide her to him. Yet nothing filled the empty space he had left behind. And then, one morning, the phone rang, a sound that had become both a source of hope and dread over the past weeks. She picked up immediately, heart pounding so violently it felt as though it might leap out of her chest. On the other end, a voice she had come to recognize with a mixture of relief and terror spoke carefully, almost hesitantly. "Ma'am. This is Officer Lin from the local police. We've discovered a body. A male, in the forest near the outskirts. We need you to come and identify him." For a heartbeat, the world froze around her. The words barely registered. Her hand shook as she gripped the receiver, and she could hear nothing but the ringing in her ears. A body? In the forest? Which forest? Who? Who is it? She managed to choke out, her voice trembling on the edge of hysteria. The officer's tone remained steady but careful, urging her to stay calm, explaining that they needed her presence to confirm the identity. The simple act of identifying the body, a step that was meant to bring clarity, suddenly felt like walking into a storm she wasn't ready to face. She barely remembered calling her mother, Kwang's grandmother, telling her to come immediately, her voice breaking with panic. Within moments, the two women were driving through winding roads, the car silent except for their stifled sobs and whispered prayers. The air seemed heavier than usual, pressing down on their chests with an invisible weight. Each passing mile was a journey through fear itself, a slow descent into a place they had hoped never to visit. They clung to each other in silence, the shared grief binding them even as dread gnawed relentlessly at the edges of their hearts. Arriving at the police checkpoint, the forest stretched before them, dark and silent, the trees towering like silent sentinels. The officers guided them down a narrow path, their steps careful, deliberate, but every step felt like a march into a nightmare. As they approached the site, the body was covered by a coarse tarp, the outline visible beneath, a tragic reminder of fragility and mortality. Mother and grandmother collapsed to their knees, hands clutching each other as tears poured freely, uncontrolled. Their sobs echoed through the forest, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. It was a grief that seemed too vast for words, a pain too raw for even the strongest heart to endure. Linda stood at the edge, frozen, her hands pressed together as if in prayer, her lips whispering silent pleas. God, please, let it not be Kwong. Please, not him. Her heart ached with the desperate hope that the voice inside her head could be wrong, that somehow, a miracle might still save him. Every fiber of her being screamed that it couldn't be true, that the boy she loved, the boy they all cherished, could not be lying lifeless before them. Yet the evidence, the stark reality of the forest clearing and the tarp-covered body, suggested otherwise. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying away her words but leaving the terror and uncertainty firmly rooted in her chest. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The forest held its breath along with them. Questions spiraled endlessly. Was it Kwong? Could there still be hope? Was there a chance he had survived, or had fate finally closed the door on their desperate search? The silence answered nothing, offering only the weight of grief and the unbearable tension of waiting for a truth that might shatter everything. And as the three women huddled together, trembling and crying, the forest seemed to echo their silent prayer, that somehow, against all odds, this nightmare might not be the end. The three women huddled together at the edge of the clearing, their bodies trembling from shock and grief, each breath a struggle against the weight of despair pressing down upon them. Mother's hands shook violently as she reached toward the tarp, every fiber of her being screaming in denial. She wanted to believe, just for a moment, that this was a mistake, that the officers had misread the scene, that Kwong was somewhere else, alive and safe, waiting to run into her arms. But deep down, a chilling certainty gnawed at her chest, the kind of certainty that refuses to be silenced. No matter how desperately hope claws its way into the cracks of a broken heart, Linda remained frozen a few steps back, her knuckles white as she gripped her clasped hands in prayer. Her voice trembled as she whispered again and again, "Please, God. Not him. Not Kwong." The words were almost a mantra, a desperate attempt to summon a miracle from the shadows of impossibility. She could feel the panic bubbling inside her, an almost physical ache that made her chest tighten with every shallow breath. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching endlessly, dragging her through waves of fear, doubt, and hopeless longing. She wanted to scream, to run, to collapse onto the cold earth and refuse to move until some sign appeared to tell her Kwong was alive. But she could do nothing but watch, powerless, as the unfolding reality seemed to close in like a vice around her heart. The officers gently lifted the tarp, revealing the body beneath. Even from a distance, it was unmistakable. The outline, the posture, the faint familiar features, it was Kwong. The sight hit mother and grandmother like a physical blow, knocking them to the ground. They screamed, high-pitched, desperate cries that echoed through the silent forest, carrying every ounce of their grief, their terror, and their shattered hope. Linda stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face, and fell to her knees beside them, her voice breaking as she whispered, "No, it can't be him. It just can't." Her heart pounded wildly, caught between disbelief and unbearable pain. Every instinct in her body begged her to deny the truth, to insist that somehow, somewhere, Kwong was still alive, yet the silence of the forest offered no comfort. The trees stood as silent witnesses, their leaves rustling in a soft wind that seemed almost mournful, carrying the echo of grief in its wake. The officers spoke in gentle, measured tones, explaining that the identification would need to be confirmed through standard procedures, but their words felt distant, almost irrelevant to the raw, immediate anguish consuming the three women. Each second felt like an eternity as they struggled to process the enormity of the moment, the full weight of loss pressing down with an unrelenting force. Linda's thoughts raced frantically, desperately searching for any shred of hope, any tiny possibility that she could cling to. Maybe it wasn't Kwong. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe, against all odds, he had escaped whatever danger had taken him away, and he was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. The questions swirled in her mind, each one sharper than a knife, each one pulling her deeper into a vortex of anxiety. Could there really be hope, or was this the cruel truth she had been dreading for so long? And yet, even in the midst of despair, a tiny spark remained. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a whisper of hope that refused to die. Maybe, just maybe, the truth would be kinder than it seemed. Maybe there was still a chance, however slim, for a miracle. Linda closed her eyes, pressed her palms together, and prayed with all her heart, willing the universe to bend in their favor, to protect Kwong if he was still alive, to let him return to the warmth and safety of the people who loved him most. For a long, suspended moment, the forest remained silent, holding its breath along with them. And in that silence, in the fragile intersection of hope and despair, one question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. Could Kwong still be saved? Could the heartache of this terrible discovery be undone? Or was this the moment when everything they had feared finally came to pass? The answers remained hidden, leaving mother, grandmother, and Linda suspended between grief and a faint, stubborn hope that refused to be extinguished.